So at the top of the call around the optimization, we spoke about how we solve around data issues, but we also alluded to compute. And from a compute piece, what we mean is a lot of times when you look at these Excel models, they will have compounded logic, which is being repeated over and over and over again. Two very simple examples where you'll see this. One is in scenario analysis, where typically a base case is, let's say, kind of modeled out. And then, though, if it's modeled out on a tab, let's say, that tab will get duplicated multiple times to be able to model out different assets or different scenarios, I should say. But on that same mindset, that could also be a modeling path around modeling different assets, where again, the base logic is meant to be the same between every asset. The delta is just really the inputs. And we see that sometimes around portfolio analysis, where all of a sudden you come across these Excel files that have like 150 tabs. In theory, every tab is exactly the same. From a business logic perspective, the delta is the inputs. We say, look, you don't need to do that. You model it once, you load that logic into the schematic engine, and then you can get access to it by just kind of passing in the relevant inputs, and Schematic will return the specified outputs that you want to see from that computational run. And what we mean by that is in this example, here I have a very kind of simple valuation model. And what I want to do is I want to flex these three inputs for 7 scenarios, or it could be for 7 different, let's say, kind of companies that I'm modeling. This is the delta that I'm going to change to model out each one of those examples. And with that, all I want, so the key business logic is, let's say, captured in this area here. But ultimately, I don't want to be replicating this logic over and over and over again. All I really want to do is just pass in 3 different inputs to be able to retrieve the computational outputs. Now, one way that can be done in Schematic is if I come to this scenario and asset analysis tab, scroll up to the top, what you'll see here is I've got a location of this existing model specified. And again, this could be a model, but with that location will allow me to load the model into the schematic engine. And we do that using excel.load. And once that's loaded into the schematic engine, then what I need to do is I need to define what are the inputs and what are the outputs to that model. And we use this from workbook function to do that, where the first parameter is tell me the model that's loaded into the schematic engine. The second parameter is tell me the location of where the input cells are in that model. And here what you'll see is that I'm referencing this section here, which specifies the tab name and the cell location. Now, in reality, what you're seeing here, this is being driven by named ranges in the Excel model. So if the structure changes, these locations will update accordingly. And the same is also true with the last parameter of this function. Tell me where are computational cells you want to bring back. For what I've done here is I've actually written out the 7 scenarios that I want to compute. And to get the results for these 7 scenarios, they're actually being depicted down here. And if I click into this cell, we look in the formula bar, what we can see here in the middle is that we have this F. If you keep an eye where my cursor is in the results section, and I just come up to the scenario section where my inputs are, as soon as I change these values, you can see the results down below are updating accordingly. So this is really cool because what it means is I have this capability to create a base case to allow my model to be simplified. It doesn't have to be a collection of compounded formulas to be able to model out a particular case. And then if I now want to scale this against 10 scenarios, 10 assets, 20, 30, 40, this is super scalable. If I want to now marry this with the data piece that we saw at the top of the call, i.e. the capability to be able to access data, we can do that quite gracefully. And what I mean by that is here we have an example where I have another CSV And again, this could be a database call to access the data. But in this instance, if I click on this cell here, which will load the data into the schematic engine, what we can see is I'm bringing in 10,000 rows. Let's call this 10,000 scenarios. And with these 10,000 scenarios, I want to be able to compute for each one of these entries. Now, the way I would do that in this example is with this table in the schematic engine, I'm going to compute a calculated column. There's going to be a fourth column, which will appear in a second. And the way how I compute that calculated column on the fly is if I click on this cell and we look in the formula bar first, what we can see is that we have this table.calculate column function. The first parameter is tell me the source of data that you want to execute this against. With that source of data, tell me the column headings. And then the third parameter is tell me the calculation you want me to run on this calculated one of the columns in that input set, and it multiplies it by another. Or it could look at, let's say, the row above, and from that, perform another. But in this case, we're actually passing in the whole logic of this model of what we were doing before. 3 inputs, calculate it against the whole model, and return back to me 3 specific. And with that said, that last parameter is tell me what do you want to the calculated column that is created on the fly. So now looking in the viewer, we can see we have that fourth column. And with that fourth column, we've actually packed in the results for each one. So this is really cool because what it means is I can model out my IP in Excel just for a single use. I can then save that Excel model somewhere. Again, it could be project share, SharePoint, does not really matter. With that, I could then open up another Excel model if I wanted to, or someone else could open up an Excel model on their desktop. With Schematic, get access to a data source, where that data source exposes the relevant input data to my base case model. In this particular case, for this user, what he actually wants to do is he wants to expose the business logic to his model to a data set that has over 2 million. So from his perspective, he's not actually going to be bringing all the results back into Excel, but he's using the schematic function to act as a springboard to be able to say, okay, let's do the initial POC. Can I connect up to 100,000 rows of data, bring it into the schematic engine, run, let's say, the analysis against a particular model. If I want, I can bring that back into Excel, validate everything looks good. And now with that validation, once that model is converted to an API endpoint, the limitations around Excel, i.e. the number of rows, the number of columns, that all disappears. I can expose that logic. I can expose these. So this is really, really nice. The final thing which I'll just say about this table that some of you may be kind of thinking about is, yes, with the results, we've kind of packed the results in to this scenario result column. But we do have the capability to unpack those results. So as you're looking here on my screen, I've now kind of exposed the investor cash flow column, the IRR column, and if I select the next one,